Hello, hello. Chris here with another episode of the Make It Podcast. And this is a bonus episode of the Make It Podcast with actor, writer, and producer Alan Powell. Why are we giving you a bonus episode? Well, his film, his Netflix film, A Week Away, is now available for you to view and support and show love to. And so we want to do the same, show love for Alan and Kaylee Bailey and the whole team that are friends of this podcast and drop this episode on you guys. It's also very valuable. It is a deep dive on all things tools, tactics, methodologies, motivation around being a indie filmmaking creative. So please enjoy, and we'll be back in your podcast player soon with a brand new episode of the Make It Podcast. You're listening to Make It, a podcast by Bonsai Creative that helps aspiring professionals in film get where they're going faster by dissecting the advice, knowledge, and insights of professional creatives in the film industry. I'm your host, Chris Barkley.
My name is Alan Powell. I'm an actor, writer, and producer. I have no idea if you know me from anything, but if you did, maybe you were watching Quantico or some film, or who knows. But I'm excited to be here and talk about how we get to continue to do this thing we love.
Alan Powell, welcome to the Make It Podcast.
Thank you, sir. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you as well. You know, we crossed paths a long time ago. It seems like, and it's been so fun sitting back, sort of watching you ascent, if you will. But I think in a way, your whole life has been about that. You've been doing that, you know, from the beginning. You have a number of projects you've been working on, and the latest one, we got news, Netflix will be producing, called A Week Away, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But going back to your high school days and going back to just sort of the beginning of things, it was shocking to me to sort of find out that you hadn't been doing things even earlier, because what I spent the last, I'd say from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. last night, I watched you on YouTube doing various things, and including singing, acting, interviews, everything. And the thing that stood out to me is that you are undeniably talented. And so,
well, that's very kind of you, Chris. Thank you.
You know, it's true, and it's one of those things that it stands out in such an obvious way. And so I'm curious, if you had any reservations about going into this field, why was that?
Well, you know, I grew up in a musical family, so music was just what was around, much more so than filmmaking or acting, for that matter. So just kind of what was close, proximity. And then my younger sister was fascinated with musical theater, and so that's kind of where I did a musical in high school my senior year, just for fun, because I was bored. And that was the first time I'd ever acted, but I was really like drawn to it. I remember watching Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan, and there's a scene that, if you're a fan of the film, he's putting on a front for his unit, and then takes an aside and goes over. And I think they had just lost their medic, the Giovanni Ribisi character, I think, is where this falls, and goes over to the side and just has a breakdown. You know, Spielberg and the writer geniusly implanted that shake. The first thing we see from his character is opening on his hand as it's shaking, and this is kind of the payoff moment for that plant, where it starts shaking and he can't control it, and he basically has a breakdown. I just remember as a kid watching that moment, and knowing in my head that Tom Hanks was not in World War II. There were people around. At the very least, there were cameras. I didn't understand how production worked, but I knew that they weren't actually experiencing that. I knew that Giovanni Ribisi did not actually die moments before. All these things, but still I was moved by that character and by the story because of what Tom did in that moment. I remember being fascinated by that, both challenged, inspired, certainly fascinated, and on some level being like, man, that is really cool. I'd love to do that. And so that kind of started me on an internal fascination that I just kind of cultivated over the years, which is to say I would, you said you were watching videos of me singing. I had the privilege of being in a band called Anthem Lights for a while. And so we would be on a plane flying to play a show, and I'd be reading a book on acting with no prospects. Like, I wasn't an actor. I just was fascinated by it. And then when all of the stars aligned, if you will, there was a film coming through Nashville looking for their lead actor, but they were much more interested in finding a musician who they could kind of teach to act as opposed to finding an actor who they could fake musicianship. And so many things had to come together for that to work out, as things often do, right? But it did. I was fortunate enough, and they gave me that part. And looking back on it now as a producer and having acted obviously for a while now, I know how crazy it was that they let a novice, a first timer, play the lead in their movie. But very, very grateful. And anyway, just fell in love with the process exactly as I anticipated that I would, from the moment they gave me that job, and just never wanted to stop. And so I've been fortunate enough to, although I took last year off as an actor, to make this movie that I assume we'll get into at some point. It's just one of my favorite things in the world to do, and it's so much fun. And I've been so happy to continue to do it.
Yeah, and so there are so very few people, Alan, that can, and very few creatives that can win at two games. And yet that's precisely what you have done and are doing. You started with Yellow Cavalier and then moved into Anthem Lights, and sort of at its peak, you walked away to give your full attention to film. How tough a decision was that? And how did you come about making that decision?
Yeah, you've done your research. It's impressive. So Yellow Cavalier is the same band as Anthem Lights. We just changed the name. But yeah, I mean, it was not easy, but at the same time, you have to, when you know, it's kind of one of those like cliche phrases. But like I said, the first day, not even the first day on set, but the first time, it was a Saturday. It was a callback for the first movie I ever did called The Song. It was a Saturday. It was 2 weeks after the initial audition. I came back for the callback, and they were really interested in me playing this part. And so it was me and another actor that were basically there all day reading with the other prospects for different characters. And so I was there for like 8 or 10 hours in Regina Moore's office, who's a casting director there in Nashville, who I love to this day. She's still one of my favorite people on the planet for this reason. And really cool full circle on this movie that we just produced and shot in Nashville last year, that Netflix acquired, as you were mentioning. I got to hire her as the local casting director in Nashville. It was just a really cool full circle thing. But, from that callback, I was like, this is what I want to do. Like this is all I want to do. And so from that moment, I knew that I would begin phasing out of Anthem Lights. Now, I didn't do it for another 2 or 3 years, because another aspect of just my life personally is I've got a whole bunch of kids and a lot of people that depend on me, and a lot of people that I have to take care of. So obviously financially, I can't just jump ship and leave the thing that's taking care of them for this other thing that is not providing for my family yet. So I had to wait and keep my head down and keep working until it came to a place where I was able to step away from music, because film and acting was taking care of the family. So it just took some time, and juggling both those things is, like anything else, is not easy, but you do what you have to do. And I was so privileged, and am so privileged, to be able to do both of those things, for a living. It's because so many people want to do either. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do both and continue to do that. So it's just a matter of essentially practicality. I had to wait and keep working and until I got to a place where I could do just the thing that I knew I wanted to do. And even from there, it started as an actor and then grew into producing because you keep pushing and you keep growing. And I look to direct next and never want to stop producing because I love every aspect of filmmaking, and never want to stop acting because I feel like I have something to offer and something to say. And it's one of the great joys of my life. But now, having done both of those things, I'm fascinated by the director's chair and think that I don't know what it is yet. I don't have the story. I'm excited for that challenge.
Yeah, as am I. I can't wait to see what comes out of that, and I hope you'll stay in touch with us on it. And so I have a Regina King story, or Regina Moore story. And she was the casting director on A Week Away. And I've never told this Regina Moore story.
Okay.
Publicly. I told it to Regina to her face. So I'd done a talk, and she was attending the talk, or maybe it's the other way around. No, it was before I did my talk. It was she had done a talk, and I attended it. And she was going around shaking hands and answering questions and stuff. And I said, hey, we know each other before this. And she said, well, how's that? I said, 20 years ago, you walked into an Applebee's and saw me as a waiter and asked me to come audition for a commercial. and I said, I came, and this is what happened. So I came. I think it was a Reebok commercial, Alan. So I came, I went to the bathroom, sort of had almost like a psych yourself up moment, like in the mirror. Like, because I had never done anything before. I didn't know anything about it. I just literally was following a suggestion that she had given me. And I'm in the mirror, like getting ready. And out of the bathroom comes this guy who's wearing nothing but a Speedo in the bathroom.
What?
Yes. And he is jacked. And not only is he jacked, he's oiled up. He has oil all over his abdomen and everything, right? And he's bald-headed. He's a black dude. He's bald-headed. And even his head, Alan, was oiled up. And I was like, holy shit. So I felt I was on my heels. And you know what? I felt so self-conscious. I was like, I can't compete against this guy. That I didn't even do it. And Regina was like, you should have done it. He probably didn't get the part because we don't go for guys that are all oiled up like that. It probably doesn't fit the part. You should have done it. And it was a great life lesson for me, just in sort of having the self-esteem and the ego to just go out there and put it all on the line and not worry about it. But I've never really told that story. But yeah, that was my first entree into Regina Moore. And she's awesome. She's fantastic. And she tells it like it is in her talks.
She's great. I mean, as I mentioned, legitimately one of my favorite people. And you could build a case for my life being very, very different were it not for her and her belief in an unknown, and her own talent and trusting herself and spotting this guy who'd never done anything. So I'm very appreciative of her.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about A Week Away. This is your new film that you wrote. And Netflix picked up. I'm really excited about it. I believe Bonsai might have even got pitched this story years ago. I'm not sure if it's the same one. But I was so pumped to see it, when it happened. How long have you had this particular story in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we talked about it years ago because it's an idea that I had maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I just believed, I guess is a better word, that there was something special about it. I mean, I knew that we hadn't seen it in the marketplace and it hadn't been done, which was confusing to me and surprising. And, I could just continue to cultivate it. And finally I think the draft is 16, if I remember correctly. So what is that, 4 years ago? almost, Kaylee Bailey and I wrote the first draft of this story, and I had never written before. And so there's another thing. I'm just like, well, just dive in, see how it goes.
Right.
But was fortunate enough to have a friend and a partner like Kaylee Bailey who had written and continues to do so, and she's great. And so anyway, so we wrote this first draft together in 2016, and so it's been a while.
And Kaylee Bailey is a friend of the podcast, and you can listen to her episode. I believe it's like episode 10 or something like that. So she came early on and talked to us on this podcast. And,
that's cool. Did you guys talk a week away, or how long ago was that?
Oh, years ago. No, we're gonna have her back on to talk about it. She wanted you to go first.
Oh, okay.
So hopefully we get her back on. But I did see her recently at an industry party, and she's just awesome. And she's also another one where you just kind of know she's going to do fine because she's so focused and talented.
She's lovely, and just like so many other creatives, myself included, Kaylee Bailey. And I'm glad that this is coming up, actually, because I know that your podcast is mostly for creatives, I imagine. Mm-hmm. Us creatives, man, we doubt ourselves, and Kaylee Bailey is so talented, and that's what our partnership has been, just us encouraging each other, that our ideas are good, that our ability is sufficient. This is what hopefully good creative relationships do, because this is a struggle I think that we all have, oddly enough.
Yeah, and you mentioned that this story wasn't out in the world and you were surprised by that. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what this movie is about?
Yeah, and what I mean when I say that specifically is just that A Week Away is to my knowledge, and I think this is true, is the first ever faith-based musical. Which is just weird because the biggest industry in the faith-based space in general is music. And we've all known and seen over the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years how the film side of has done a lot of successful projects. But nobody put the worlds together. And that was kind of our goal and our hope. And so we were the first people to do that. And that's, so we just thought that was interesting. So there's a whole lot more to unpack there, but at the end of the day, I just wanted to create something that hadn't been done. I grew up, my dad was a pastor my whole life, so I grew up in that culture, in that industry, in that world. Anthem Lights started as a Christian band. Like I just understand that world. And so again, they say, write what you know. They say exist in worlds that you're familiar with, because you can be the barometer for authenticity, specifically as a young writer and even as a young producer. I realized that one of my main strengths on that project, whether it be writing the script or producing the music or producing the film, was that I knew it. It was in my bones. And so I knew when it was inauthentic. I knew when it was going in a direction that it shouldn't be going, or didn't feel real, or wasn't doing what I always hoped this either story or movie would do. And that was really my greatest strength as a first-time producer and a first-time screenwriter. And so I'm hoping now, after that experience, that I can venture out, and now I could produce and or write things that weren't so in my bones. But I loved that experience, and I think that was one of the great strengths that I had going into that. So it would encourage young filmmakers and young writers and young creatives, truthfully, like when you're getting started, exist in worlds that you really know and that you really have experienced and are essentially an expert in, because your research is done for you, and you can just work on the side, on the aspect of things that you're not familiar with yet. And don't let lack of knowledge of the world you're trying to create be one of those things. So that was that was important for me in this process.
Yeah, and it's something me and Nick preach. Every other week we do indie talks where we just kind of talk about what's happening and or talk about branding and marketing specifically. And you really hit it out of the park on this, because you have a niche audience and you have a niche genre within the film itself. I mean, you really can't do better than that. And I think understanding that is so important, because that's really what Netflix is betting on. It's like you guys are walking in with two different distinct audiences at once, people who love musicals and people who love faith-based films. And so I think it's going to do really, really well. I'm rooting for you. Do you have?
I think just to hang
ahead.
out there for a second, Chris, because I think that's so important. As we were having, and continue to have, for that matter, conversations with potential distribution partners. We took this movie around, all around town, as you can imagine, before finally landing with Netflix. And one of the things that people continued to respond really positively to, even before they saw the movie, was what you're talking about, the idea that we know who this is for. This is a very specific piece of business. And I think that's something that young filmmakers, whether they're directing, writing, producing, we often forget that. I see that a lot. Like, we'll make another good indie drama, or we'll make another this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, well, who's it for? Like, who's going to watch this movie or watch this TV show? And the truth is, if we can't answer that question very specifically, then the potential partners are not going to be able to. And if you can't answer it, then they're just not going to be interested in it. You have to be able to say with confidence and essentially a tested theory, here's who we're making this piece of content for. Here's who we believe is going to consume this. And that seems to be one of the things that kind of gets glazed over at the really early stage of contemplation for creatives, which is something that, we got to be able to drill down and answer that question before, in my opinion, we spend certainly time and energy and money on an idea that we thought was cool because, it'd just be cool to be able to shoot that stuff. Well, you can, and you should if you just really want to. But if the hope is that it's professionally successful, we must be able to answer that question.
Thank you so much for that, man. That is spot on. And we always say you should be able to fit your audience on the tip of a pen. You want to whittle it down that specifically. A lot of times we'd ask, well, who's this movie for? It's for everybody. Well, then it's for nobody.
Yeah, if that's the response, you got some work to do.
Right, and so it's sometimes it's not the message, but it's the messenger. So I'm glad that you said that, and it's so spot on. Do you have any tips for or advice for co-writing?
Yeah, I would say I've only done it once. I want to be really clear. Well, I've done it. I do it now, but up to that stage, I'd only done it once. And find somebody who you respect, obviously creatively, because you can imagine a world where you're co-writing with something and you don't really think they're good in the first place. So when they offer an idea, it starts at a massive disadvantage, and that is only going to end in discontentment and frustration because they keep pitching ideas that you think are terrible. They might not be terrible, but such a big part of the creative process is having the freedom to throw terrible ideas out, like be able to say terrible things, so that, when Kaylee Bailey gives this idea and it's terrible, she has the freedom to do that. And then that makes me think of this other idea that's a little less terrible. And then she takes that little less terrible idea and then then that forms an idea that's actually pretty good. And then I take that one and go, here's one that actually is definitely good. And then she takes that, and before you know it, we end up at great, but it started with terrible. But you have to have the trust between those partners to be able to start with that terrible idea and just throw anything out. So I think there has to be a respect creatively between the two. And I think that partnerships I think of like, if you're writing music, one of you is really good at melody and one of you is really good at lyric, is kind of a perfect partnership. And I think there's something in that, like in screenwriting, if one of you is really good, like once you get in a scene, and the other one is really versed and has a passion for structure, that feels like a perfect marriage to me. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to be that way. Maybe you guys have similar strengths and similar weaknesses, which is okay. But at least being aware of the weakness of the partnership is going to be important. I think often when you're doing that, you're probably going to end up in with a story or a script where you're going to have to bring in somebody else who does have that strength. I mean, that's really what screenwriting is, right? It's a combination of structure, which is pivotally important, and then writing interesting dialogue once you get in the scene, creating interesting characters once you get in the scene. So if you have a partnership that just does one of those really well and the other one is kind of lacking, well, you'll probably have to bring in somebody who does the other thing. So a best partnership early on is to be able to cover all of those bases. And that was kind of our experience on A Week Away as well. And I definitely know that Kaylee Bailey has grown in all aspects of her writing. And I like to think that I have as well. But I think we were bringing different things to the table at that particular time that just worked well together.
Yeah, and she has a lot of promise. I read one of her early screenplays as well. And I wonder if there was a moment where you two are in the room together and you just look at each other and you realize, I think we got something here. When did you know it was good?
Well, I mean, it's two things. First of all, the first draft that we wrote together, as you can imagine, is very much a first draft. I mean, it's the movie. If I sent you our draft and you watch the movie, it's very different. But that's just how movies go, right? Like that's the redrafting and rewriting process. But I think for me, that when I was like, this is, I'm glad we've done this. We should keep leaning into this, and I will continue to spend a large amount of my time trying to get this thing made. Kaylee Bailey and I both grew up in the church, and we both grew up going to church camp a lot. And this movie essentially is set at a church camp. When we felt like it gave us all those feelings, the reminiscent feelings, and we're writing things that we've experienced, but we were adding the layer of storytelling and adding the, elevating it, if you will, just so that it was entertaining in a film from a film side. But we still felt like we had that tinge and was giving us those feelings. There's something that you just feel like other people are going to feel that as well. Other people are going to resonate with that as well. And I think it was falling in place, and the structure was solid, and it just feels like you're onto something. You get the feeling like I would watch this movie. Like I would watch this movie, and I'm not even really the demographic. So that's gotta say something. Effortless. I like the word effortless in creativity. I feel like if you're laboring, I'll say it differently. If it feels labored, the audience won't enjoy it. Now, don't get me wrong. I think as creatives and as artists, we have to move through laboring. Like we have to get in that aspect of it, but then be constantly like pushing through that until it feels effortless again. Typically, the best ideas, in my experience, like come in a moment of effortlessness. They're like, oh, this would be, this is an example. Faith-based musical, like that's easy. Like that should exist. Oh, we'll set it at church camp? Of course. Like all that stuff feels obvious.
Right, yeah.
Then, Kaylee Bailey and I get in the room together and we labor through all of the stuff you have to labor through and make it, and feels like work, but you keep doing that until you come back out on the other side with something that feels effortless again. If I told you the story of the movie, I could tell it to you in 30 seconds and you'd be like, oh, of course. Like that's, yes. Of course that's what would happen. But we have to, Kaylee Bailey and I had to work through pounding our head against the wall until we got to that moment. It's like, oh, the best ideas always, in my opinion, the best ideas always feel like the ones that were right under your nose the whole time. Mm-hmm. And until that is there, I mean, think of like the great films, like I don't know why Die Hard is on my mind right now, but Die Hard is like, that's right under your nose, right? Ex-cop comes back and he's got his ex-wife who he still loves, who gets in trouble, and he's kind of like a useless cop. He's not really good at his job, but these guys come in and they bust up this thing and they hold everybody hostage. And of course, he's the guy that's got to save everybody. And you know exactly how that story's going to go.
Exactly.
It feels effortless. Now, I promise you it wasn't. Somebody had I know it was a novel first, but he had a spark of an idea. Then he had to work through all those beats so that they felt effortless. And that to me is what I'm always looking for. You know, whether you're thinking like, what's the next scene, or what's this piece of dialogue, all the way up to what's a movie that we can make. Like, I want an idea that feels effortless, and then I'm willing to do the work that you have to do, but all hoping that the end of it feels effortless again, because I think it has to feel effortless for the audience. You know, I was watching How to Train Your Dragon yesterday with my kids.
Great movie.
Perfectly structured movie. And it feels absolutely effortless. You'll look up and the movie will be over because one scene leads to the next one. Then of course that happens. Then of course that has to happen. I care about all of the characters in such a limited amount of time. There's so much work as a writer and a creative that goes into giving the audience member this carefree experience.
Yes.
But I do think that the goal at the end of it is to feel effortless. And I also think that, like a lot of indie films, that's the difference. Like, so many indie films, young filmmakers, like, just feel so labored to me. Like, you're asking the audience to put themselves through something, and nobody wants to do that. Like, nobody wants to do that. It feels like we haven't done the work yet as a creative to craft a story in a way that is more enjoyable. And I don't mean like people are laughing enjoyable, because, you know, Breaking Bad, you're not going to laugh very much when watching that show, and it's a great show.
Right.
But you're going on a ride and you're enjoying yourself, obviously. So I don't even know what the question was, but this idea of effortlessness is so prevalent in my mind right now. It's something that I'm always working towards, but I know that you have to work hard to make it seem like it wasn't hard work.
Right.
And we got to do that.
Yeah, it's actually profound what you're saying in a lot of ways, because almost, I'd say 80% of the screenplays that we read that don't have typos and are actually readable and are structured decently, their major flaw is exposition. Like, so they want us to care about the characters sooner than we're ready to as an audience, and that becomes problematic when you really want that payoff, you know, in Act 2 and Act 3 of your story. And so it very much feels like being an athlete, where we watch athletes do things and then we think we can go out and do them, and we find out how hard it really is to do those things. Yeah. But they've practiced and trained so well. They're so prepared, and in a lot of ways have God-given talent that allows them to do things that seem easy but are quite difficult. And by the way, speaking of athletics, you're it's no secret that you are quite jacked and keep yourself in shape. Congratulations. You were in a film called Worth Fighting For, and it looked like you were the second coming of Brad Pitt and Troy. Can you just talk this audience through what your general diet and workout routine is?
Yeah, well, listen, Worth Fighting For, yes, I worked really hard to look the way that I look in that, you know, poster image and that trailer. So, you know, I'm proud of it. There's no doubt. But you can't sustain life that way, for what it's worth. But what I, you know, on a daily basis, I'm literally just, I always pace when I walk, but I'm pacing in my gym here at the house, and it's nothing fancy, but I converted my garage into a gym because fitness is important to both my wife and I. And so the cars park outside and we work out in the gym. So, or in the garage, but you know, it's important to me. I wake up in the morning and, try to eat relatively healthy. I should dial my diet in more than I do, but I enjoy lifting weights and I enjoy exercising. I always have ever since college. So, when I know there's a camera in my near future, I'll dial up the workout a little bit, even though it's, you know, I push myself pretty hard in here all the time because it's fun to me. It's a competition. I always write down what I do, whether it be the reps and or the weight of a specific move that I'm doing for my program that week. And then I usually have a cycle of 5-week programs. And so if I did chess last Monday, this Monday I wrote down what I did last week, and I have to beat myself. So there's an internal competition that's really fun to me. So I enjoy that aspect of it. And as far as the diet is concerned, if there's a camera in my near future, I'll dial in my diet. When that's not the case, I just try to be generally healthy, but I still want to live life. So my diet is not as strict as it may seem if you're looking at my footage or photos, because I knew there was a camera coming up. So I dialed that stuff in. So I try to stay anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks out from being really dialed in. So that I can, still have fun and have ice cream with my kids and have a cocktail a night with my wife and that kind of stuff. But if I know that I'm doing a shirtless fighting scene, as I did in that movie, there's no drinking, there's no sugar. I'm eating the same thing every day for 3 months, trying to look like the second coming of Troy in a little while. So
I love this idea that you have created a competition with yourself, and that hits home for me. I used to do that in basketball all the time. Things that would seem mundane to someone else would be so intense for me. I would sit there and just literally try to hit one more free throw than I hit the previous 50-shot session. So that stuff drives you. Just depends on what your personality type is and your temperament is. And I could see you doing that and getting the results you want. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's really fun. I enjoy that. I'm a very competitive person. Hopefully I'm mature enough now in my older age that I don't let it, we could play a game of Monopoly and I wouldn't end up yelling at you. But
you flip the board over.
Inside, I care that much. I've learned to hopefully filter and only let that beast out when he's helpful and not harmful. But when I get in the gym, he's helpful and there's nobody else around, so I can scream as loud as I want and yell at myself and try to beat last week's Allen. And that's, there is some aspect of that just kind of is a part of us, and it's true for me in general. So you said, I had the opportunity to make a living as a musician, which a lot of people want to do. And then I switched and made one as an actor, which a lot of people want to do. And then now I've transitioned again and have done it as a producer and a writer. And there's absolutely an aspect of that competitiveness that is necessary for me, at least so far, to have been able to do that and hope to continue to do that and do that at a higher level. It's the same guy inside for me that kind of pushes me to those things.
I love that. It's a great thing for those who want to invest in films, I think, that are listening to understand. I think, one thing that's really tough to learn, because it really runs like an angel investing business. And one thing you really have to learn is you're basically betting on your founders, or in this case in film, it would be the filmmakers, right? The producers and the directors. And it takes a while to develop that judgment, to figure out, wait, who are you? Why would this work? Why wouldn't it work? And a big part of that is, are they competitive? Are they going to see this thing to the end? Are they determined to be successful no matter what? And that's something that Bonsai has learned actually in the last 5 years, is our judgment has gotten so much better in terms of trying to pick out and discover that trait. So thank you for that. And you've mentioned growing up in the church. It's no secret. You're very forward about your family and great family that you have. And here we are in the film business. And so the health of your soul comes to mind. And so I'm wondering, do you have any advice or exercises that you go through to keep yourself from losing your soul in this business while remaining successful?
Yeah, I almost did. So that helps, right? When you almost lose your soul, and this isn't the podcast for all that stuff, but when you do experience that, like when you walk up to the edge, for lack of a better term, and you feel like you're already in the middle of the free fall, and what that looks like, it's easy, not easy, but then you're forced perspective. And I guess now looking back, I can literally say I was fortunate enough to be able to experience that, because it's given me that perspective that couldn't be shaken out of me by any amount of money or opportunity or film or any of that stuff. So that's kind of what happened to me. But on this side, looking back, to be able to speak to someone else, I would just, there's a lot of people who, and I'm just speaking frankly, I don't know how this is going to sound, but I'll, for the sake of the importance of this side of the conversation to me, I'll say it anyway. There's a number of people who look at what I've had the privilege to do in my career so far and wish that they could do it or had done it, right? Whether it be being, a series regular on a network show, or having a movie get made, or then having that movie acquired by Netflix, or being an artist, all the things, which is great. I feel so privileged to have been able to do those things. But it reminds me of what Jim Carrey, one of my favorite quotes in the world, but Jim Carrey said, "I wish everybody could be rich and famous so that you know that it's not the answer." I'm neither rich nor famous, but I understand what he's saying with the small amount of taste of both of those that I've been able to experience, which is to say, man, when I wake up in the morning and I see my wife laying next to me, and we'll go get breakfast for our kids, and right now I just got a bike down off the ceiling of our garage because my kid wanted to ride it, and I mean that's what it is, man. That's why we do what we do. And the truth is, if all of this stuff went away, I'd be fine, because there's only 6 things in life that I feel like I can't live without, and they all have my last name. And I love what I do. I feel privileged to do what I do, but they are the reason that I do what I do. And if I lost the vocation, I'd be fine. But I have to have the people that motivate the vocation. So it's just kind of, it's maturity, it's growing up, it's forcing yourself to look at what really matters and paying attention to what really matters. And I hope that everybody listening either pushes themselves to have that perspective, or best case, already has it. That's important.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. And sort of in that same theme, if you could give, let's say, an indie creative, someone who's going into writing or making their first feature film, maybe they're fresh out of film school, or maybe they're fresh out of their mom's basement. If you could give them one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oof, one piece of advice. Do something. I think that's the thing that I continue to have with my fellow creative friends who I appreciate and love and respect and want great things for. There's often this waiting that's happening that confuses me, and I don't think is helpful and or necessary. Truthfully, I mean, we have a camera on our phone that is more capable than what Scorsese had when he shot Raging Bull. Yes. That's just the reality of the situation. Go do something. Just in my own personal experience with regard to A Week Away, this movie doesn't sell to Netflix if Kaylee Bailey and I don't just go write that script. Nobody paid us to do that, obviously. And so we went and did it. And that's what we have to do. There's what are the actors, directors, writers, producers, go out and make something. Quit waiting. There's great people such as yourself, avenues that people can, get their stuff seen by, the Nashville Film Festival. There's places to show your work. But even more importantly, it's just about getting good, right? It's just about working your craft. And every time, if you're a director, every time you direct something, you get better. If you're an actor, every time you do a scene, specifically a scene in front of a camera, and a camera can be your phone, you get better. So do those things, I think, is the one piece that I would give somebody.
Absolutely. I think I'm hearing one of your kids in the background right now as we speak.
Yeah.
Well, you've been great with this and been more than generous with your time. I only have a few more questions. Are you still good?
Yeah, I'm good. Sorry, you may get some kids in the background, but I'm good.
Awesome. I'm gonna send some some bonus round sort of quick questions at you. So you have Verdes Maximus on one of your walls. What is that for? What does that mean? Translate that for us.
Verde Maximus means big green. Verde Maximus is the name. When I was going to church camp, the first year that my church did our own camp, we created 2 teams that we as campers would like compete with one another. And I was a senior at the time, and so was the grandfather of one of the teams and created this team. It was the green team, and I named it Verde Maximus. Now, fast forward however many years, 15 years, and I'm making this movie about this kid who goes to church camp, and we too, because we're pulling right out of our own experience, Caleb Bailey and I created this competition within the film. And so the name of the team that our main character ends up on as just paying homage to my team, I named Verde Maximus. So that poster that's on my wall, if that's what you're talking about, is from the movie. It was hanging in one of our lead characters' cabin in the film, and I stole it from the set, and now it hangs in my office. So that's what it is.
That's awesome. What creatives do you most admire and want to emulate, and what do you think they do from a technical or skill standpoint that sets them apart?
What creatives do I most admire and want to emulate? Aaron Sorkin is my favorite writer. I had the fortunate privilege of meeting him about 8 weeks ago, right before this. Might have been longer than that. Right before the quarantine happened, and he was lovely, and even is placating me to the extent that he continues to tell me that we're going to go get coffee at some point in the near future. But we'll see if that happens. But nonetheless, Aaron Sorkin is my favorite writer. I think what he does as a screenwriter is my favorite kind of entertainment, like my favorite thing to watch, which is just colliding ideas told in an interesting way. And another thing that I really have learned from him as a writer is that all of his villains, they're not villains in their own mind. I think his actual quote is they're all making their argument why God should let them into heaven.
That's great.
If you think back on his Jack Nicklaus, You Can't Handle the Truth, to his Steve Jobs, to, anyway, he creates great villains.
Yeah.
From an acting standpoint, I mean, there's so many actors that I deeply, deeply admire. The list would be so long. I've been fascinated by Viola Davis's performances recently. Who's not a Meryl Streep fan? She's fascinating. Tom Cruise is a movie star. I think he's a great actor, but I think he's the best movie star to ever live. I do think there's a difference there, but that's again a longer conversation.
There's a very good argument for that.
Guys like Heath Ledger, what he was able to do when he was with us, and then Philip Seymour Hoffman, and then you got the stoicism and the smallness of Anthony Hopkins and the power of Denzel Washington. One of my greatest joys after the kids go to bed is watching something from a great artist and being fascinated by it, and sometimes so fascinated that you're frustrated because they're so good. Why even try? That happens from time to time, and that's I'm sure you enjoy creativity as well. There are some times that I'm so moved and appreciative of what somebody was able to do that I start crying, but I'm not crying because of the emotion of the scene or whatever. I'm crying because of it's so amazing that somebody can do that.
Right.
I remember going to see Hamilton in New York on Broadway. It was probably a year and a half ago.
Original cast?
No, it wasn't the original cast. Lynn wasn't there anymore, but it doesn't matter. I was 6 minutes in, and I remember I'm sitting there with my wife, and I leaned over, and I told her, I said, I think this might be the most amazing piece of art I've ever seen. 7 minutes into the performance, and just being brought to tears, I'm 7 minutes in, the story isn't making me cry at that point, but being brought to tears just because of respecting what Lynn was willing to do, the sacrifices he inevitably was willing to make to bring that to life. And then now all of us get to experience it, be moved by it. And that's what's fascinating to me as a creative. It's what I want to spend my life doing. But what's really cool is that we all have our own. I couldn't have written Hamilton. I'm not even necessarily from a talent perspective, although that's true, but even from a passion perspective, that was Len's project. That was always his project. And I can only do what I can do. A Week Away was always mine. Len couldn't do with A Week Away what I did with A Week Away. Like that was my thing. That was my idea. That was my responsibility, really. And so all of us, hopefully, being open and aware enough to those kind of things that we are supposed to do and supposed to bring to life, I think is important. It's almost like it feels like a calling, and the calling will have its days where it's frustrating and I don't want to do it anymore. But if you are that committed to it and that essentially moved by it, you'll have to stay with it. You'll have to see it through. And that's kind of the stuff that I'm looking for with regard to things that I'm going to create or do or whatnot. And it's pretty rare, but it does happen if you're open to it.
That's right. You shot a video in February for Russell Dickerson called Love You Like I Used To. And you and Sarah Antonio joked that it might be the last kiss of 2020 on set. Do you think that this is going to be your last Nashville music video?
It's my first one, and probably. I mean, I don't know. I only did that one because a good friend of mine was producing it, and she's lovely, and her name is Daniela. I don't know if you know Daniela Mason at all, but she's fantastic, and so she was producing it, so she asked me to come out and do it, and I was happy to.
Right, and it feels like you'll be a little bit too busy. You've got at least 4 more films in sort of in post or in production right now. So we're going to be seeing a lot more of Alan Powell in the near future, and rightfully so. I'm so proud of you, man. I'm so excited for what you're doing, and I want you to keep going strong. Can you tell everybody where they can find you on social media and on the internet, and maybe where they can see some of your work?
Sure. My handle for most things is Alan Powell, AlanPowell, and then the number 10, only because Alan Powell was taken. So Alan Powell 10 is Instagram, Twitter. I don't know what Facebook is, but you'll find me. And as far as see work, I mean, if you YouTube Alan Powell, you can lose a lot of time, as you are apparently aware, like you did last night.
I did.
Again, I've had the privilege of being in a number of films and TV shows, a few of which you can find on Netflix, or you can go to iTunes, and they're around.
I love it, man. Alan Powell, I have one last question for you. The actor Chris Wente stole a sweater from you. Do you think you're ever going to get that sweater back?
Well, seeing as how I forgot about that, I'm going to say no. But I'm going to call him. I'm going to call him now. And is he in Los Angeles now? I don't know.
He is.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to go to his house then. Take that thing back.
Alan, this has been a blast, man. I can't wait to see what else you have in the future, and I hope I get to see you soon, and we can sit down and have a cocktail together or some dinner.
I look forward to it, Chris. Thank you.
Anytime, brother. Take care.
See you, bud.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Make It Podcast. To find more information about this week's topics, including links to relevant blog posts, projects, and indie creatives, please visit our website at www.bonsai.film. If you haven't already, you can join our podcast community on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice by searching for Make It Bonsai Creative, and the show will pop right up. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at _Bonsai Creative, and Facebook by searching for Bonsai Creative. And of course, if you're looking to take a big step towards your filmmaking success, go to www.bonsai.film and click on Book Us to schedule a free discovery meeting and needs assessment. You have everything to gain. Until next time, be better, be creative, be engaged, and thank you for listening.